Hi, my name is Tauna Szymanski, and I'm a parent of a child with significant support needs. I'm also the founder and chair of the Arlington Inclusion Task Force.
I'm Liz Altieri. I'm a professor at Radford University, and I'm also the co-director of the Virginia Inclusive Practices Center.
I'm Veronica Jennings, Senior Region Director for Special Olympics Virginia.
Hi, I'm Tannia Talento, Arlington County School Board Vice Chair. Join us in conversation.
This is a great passion of mine. I've been involved with inclusive education since the early 1980s when I worked at a school called Juwonio in Syracuse, New York. And it's also something that's turned my hair gray because it's always been one step forward and two steps back, it seems like.
I think it is one step forward and two steps back. I think that we as a society still struggle to understand that a disability is just that, a disability. That's it. It doesn't have anything to do with your ability to perform or to think. It just means that you maybe do that differently than what other people do that. And we can talk about language and other things that create that type of difference. And so trying to move the community and the country forward and understanding that is challenging, but it's exciting to be doing that work today. And I am excited to be here having this conversation with all of you because I know this is work that you're doing as well. Being on the school board right now, we're working on a policy for inclusion because we are hoping that we can have a system that ensures that all of our students are included in the day for most of their time. And I was just having a conversation not too long ago with a community member whose child is taking her electives in the general education population. And I think it should really be that her electives should be things that help this child work through her disabilities, and her general education, her actual education should be with the general population. And that is what I'm hoping that we're moving towards in the inclusive school system. And I think Arlington is really working on that. So I'm excited about the work that we're doing, but it has been slow, and I think a lot of community members still don't fully understand the challenges that are put on our community with disabilities because lack of knowledge and low expectations that really are unnecessary and unrealistic to have.
So I've only been in this field as a volunteer and as a parent really for about 5 years. My child's 10 years old now, but it wasn't until she was about 5 that I started to really think seriously and to know about inclusive education and why you would do it and how you do it. But I will say, just having been in this field for about 5 years, I think I'm far more optimistic than either of you two. You haven't said anything yet, but like I wouldn't say one step forward, two steps back. I would say the reverse, actually. So when I was growing up, I spent part of my childhood in Northern Virginia public schools. I won't say which one, but not Arlington. And I never saw students with significant disabilities growing up, never. So that when I had a child who had one, it was like the end of the world. I didn't know how to deal with it. You know, parents go through a mourning process because you have been brought up to, think of people with disabilities, significant disabilities, as bad because you never see them. So there must be something wrong with them, right? So they're not included. So, and I think this is very common. A lot of parents go through this sort of mourning period, like, what's wrong with my child? How am I gonna, And it took me several years of really becoming integrated into the disability community to realize that was just there was no basis for any of that. Actually, we have a wonderful life and family now. There are challenges, but there's nothing, it's a very positive thing. But also to know that whole experience was just wrong. Like, I'm involved in this because I firmly believe this is a civil rights issue. And I, just comparing my daughter's childhood to my childhood in the same general area, it's night and day. She has very significant disabilities. They're very obvious to people who see her on the street. We have never once heard anyone say anything hateful about her to her face, like anywhere. And, that's just remarkable. So, I really am a very positive person generally and optimistic. Yes, it's going slowly, too slowly. School board member.
It is frustrating.
But it, just in the 5 years I've been doing it in Arlington, I've noticed really positive changes just in 5 years, but especially compared to, I'm not going to age myself out my age, but
Like me.
6 years ago when I was a child, it's certainly a lot better. Night and day better. So.
I think it's important for people to realize what we're talking about when we say inclusive education. And it's really broader than disability when you think about it. It's the idea that children go to their neighborhood school and they belong there. They're welcomed there, and each child is given the supports they need to be successful both academically and socially. It's not such a radical idea.
No, it's not. And I'm very proud that I work with an organization with Special Olympics that is chartering ways of inclusiveness in education throughout the U.S. and specifically here in Virginia. We have a partnership with the Department of Education to provide more inclusive opportunities for all students in schools through sports, unified sports. And it's really been successful. Arlington has been one of the champions of inclusion here in Northern Virginia. We just celebrated Kenmore Middle School last week, or 2 weeks ago, with their being a unified champion school, which means they're fostering inclusion, opportunities, social inclusion, and then sports inclusion through unified sports. And all of those things stack up together to provide more support in the building for education and their peers being able to know who they are, foster friendships that will lead from every level of education. So I think it's very important that we in America overall have more opportunities for people to learn from one another so that they don't have discrimination or negative ideas against somebody because they don't know who they are as a person first. So to me, inclusion is getting to know a person first and then building upon that relationship so that they have opportunities to work together, live together, and play together.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not to fear people with disabilities.
Correct.
Because, when you grow up with people who are different, you don't fear them. And there's, so, one of the things we've just experienced in my family is we'll go to like the grocery store in the community or whatever. My daughter can't talk, so she has motor issues, so it's harder for her to point out people she knows. So once in a while we'll have parents come up to us and say, oh, they'll assume, I'm not gonna say her name, but are you her mom? And I say, yes. And she goes, I've heard so much about your daughter, my daughter. I'm so happy my daughter is in your daughter's class because she has grown as a person like their typical daughter, and she's become, a better person because of it. And that has not just happened once. That has happened several times over the course of when she's 10. So, so I think, and it's not that big a deal. Like, kids adjust. And they, they're like, she's just another kid. Like, what's the big deal?
She has the same interests. She likes sports. They like the same music. It's nothing different. It's just giving the opportunity for all students to be able to interact with one another and have that, know that they're the same, more alike than different.
And I firmly believe that when these kids become teachers, this is not going to be an issue. I think we're having some resistance now because our generation or my generation did not grow up with this, right? So, it's the rare exception where someone's like, oh yeah, and when you see someone who's very positive naturally, I'm like, tell me a little bit about your past. I'm like, oh, my brother or whatever, had a significant, they have some personal experience. It's not like a natural thing oftentimes, but once they have that experience too, like, or you'll hear 25 years ago, I had a student with Down syndrome in my class or whatever, and that stayed with them, and they believe in that being a social justice and civil rights issue. This person belongs here, and we're gonna do what it takes to make sure it works. So,
we do have a lot of things in place in our culture, in our schools that sort of perpetuate that separateness. I think one of it is that we call children with disabilities, we say they have special needs. And that sort of perpetuates this stereotype that somehow their needs are different than any other child's needs. They may need more of something, they may need it a greater amount during the day, but really all kids have the same needs. So that's one of the issues. We're working, I prepare teachers. That's one of the things I do. And so it's really have to help them see that our culture kind of perpetuates this separateness. And so people are going to be teachers. They still come to teacher education programs with this idea that, well, I'm going to be a teacher of these kids, and my friend is going to be a special educator, is going to be a teacher of these kids. And so, you know, we still have we have separate licensure, we have separate teacher preparation programs that sort of perpetuates a lot of what still happens in schools. And that's why I was saying that progress is slow, because it's really a culture shift.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that's why it's very important for us to have the opportunity to foster inclusion at such a young age, because if you change the mindset early, then people have different ideas that can then change the trajectory of how we teach and learn in education, like when we go to be teachers or educators or administrators, they'll have a different outlook of how they would like to be able to change the world.
You often hear stories of kids without disabilities fighting for a kid with a disability to remain in the class or whatever. Like, what's the big deal? So it's the kids who have grown up with that kid. They're like, he belongs. This is where he should be.
And I think one of the things that we are experiencing now, at least in education, is differentiated learning. And what differentiated learning teaches us is that every student has a special need. It has nothing to do with a disability. Every student learns differently. Every student experiences education differently. Some students have strengths in X factor. Other students have strengths in Y factor. And so a student with a disability is exactly the same. Their strength is here and their strength is not there, but it's a strength that maybe we're not used to seeing in the way that it is presented. And so, and you're right, it's about the generation. You know, growing up, we didn't have that experience. I had the fortunate experience of being a young adult, and when I worked at the Patent and Trademark Office, there was this gentleman, and he worked, we would all meet up at the shuttle, so everyone worked all over the Patent and Trademark Office. And I don't know what his disability was. I think it was Down syndrome. But I only knew because it was visible, but that was it. And we would engage in conversation, and I saw him every day, you know, and it was through that experience that I was able to know there is no difference in people except on how we present. But being a bilingual person and being Latina and being a child of immigrants, I had already experienced how people see you and make judgments on you based on perhaps how you look or how you speak or your accent. And so I was able to relate to say, so this is no different. It's just his difference is not a race or a language. It's just a disability. And my nephew is autistic. So from that experience, I was able to engage that. So you do learn, and I think that having the exposure, as you said, or one of you all mentioned, is important in changing the concept. And I think that's what we need to start doing in education, because it has been so segregated in how we're educating our students to become teachers. Then it just feeds into that. And really, one of the things that we're pushing for, at least in our schools, the school board, is ensuring that everyone is getting professional development and special education, as well as English language learning, ESOL HILT, because we have segregation in the English language learning programs. And so when we talk about inclusion, I know a lot of focus is on disabilities, but it also, as we mentioned earlier, encompasses all of our students in our population. So I think this is exciting times, but I do feel the frustration, and maybe it's because we're in the policy making world and we're behind in policy making, I think, in moving forward, but our community is moving faster than what our policies are moving forward in training our teachers and in training, you know, we should be training administrators, teachers, everyone who is working with students should have some training in understanding differentiated learning and working and engaging students.
But yet, the only requirement for a teacher who's not a special educator is to take one course in special education. That's what the teacher licensure regulations require.
We need to change that.
And what we know from years is that that one course actually has an opposite effect. It tends to make people just enough aware to say, well, that kid is different.
Yeah.
And I don't think I can help them.
Yeah, I'm not qualified.
I haven't been trained, right, I'm not qualified, right.
The goal, really, is that schools should try to have about 80% of their students included for most of the school day. You know, we're not saying that any child might not need small group instruction and get intensive skill-based instruction. But that might be for kids who are gifted, and that might be kids who need English language instruction, or you might need specialized reading instruction or multisensory instruction, language instruction. But the goal is 80%. And Virginia Department of Education actually publishes what those school achievement levels are. And there might be 1 or 2 school divisions in Virginia that meet that. But over half of the school divisions don't even make the minimum requirement, which is 60%. So we do have a long way to go. Yes.
I will say institutionally, we're talking about institutional barriers. One of the things I'm really hopeful about and happy about that Arlington has done in the last couple of years is to merge those silos administratively in the bureaucracy. So we used to have a separate assistant superintendent for special education and student services, and a separate assistant superintendent for teaching, learning, curriculum, instruction sort of thing. And the assistant superintendent for special ed retired a couple years ago, and they didn't replace her, and they merged these silos so that the assistant superintendent for teaching and learning supervises everyone who teaches, including the director of special ed and support services. And I really do think that was sort of an essential first step to start changing that mindset that every teacher owns every kid, you know, regardless. And so, you know, we're talking about the importance of policy, and I agree that it's very important for a school district and a leadership to project both in words and in action sort of what the beliefs are in our how we're going to operate as a school division. But you also convey a lot of that by how you're structured and how you're rewarding people and how you're evaluating people. And that's sort of another thing that a lot of people are talking about right now. Well, if principals aren't told that they should be, you know, being concerned about the performance of the students with disabilities in their school, then that's kind of an issue, right? Maybe we need to reevaluate how principals themselves are evaluated, kind of thing. I mean, that's just something that people
trained.
And how they're trained as well. So, but maybe they would care a little bit more if, you know, if their annual raise or bonus or whatever was tied to the, you know, that kind of thing. So that's just and I'm not saying that that's what we need to do, but you know, that's just another sort of institutional signal in addition to like a policy or merging these bureaucratic silos that I think really does go a long way, perhaps even more than explicit training about how we educate or differentiate or that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think you always have to have the concept of be open as administrator that everybody in the building has the same equity. And I think with our population, a lot of times we don't feel like we have the same equity. So it's about changing the person from the top mindset of how they want the school to be inclusive. So if you don't have it in your mind that you are fostering that in a school, then you're not going to have it, and people don't feel like that they're going to want to do more to foster that inclusion. Because a lot of our teachers, they are already doing a lot, and especially with special education, there's a lot of more things that happen in the classrooms that might not necessarily their gen ed colleagues understand, and vice versa. So it's about having that same shared experience and having more people to bring to the table with ideas to foster that inclusion, and having that we all have the same equity to make sure that we are promoting inclusion and that everybody is going to be successful because of it.
One of the things I've noticed just on a personal level with my own child is in many ways some of her most positive and most inclusive experiences were with people who had zero training, either as teachers or as special educators, but just had the right attitude. And they were like, well, I don't know the first thing about her or her disabilities or anything, but we'll make it work. And so, and in so many ways, those have been by far the best experiences, because we have just found it's 99% attitude. You can train all you want, but if you don't have that attitude, it's never going to work, right?
That's true.
It's just philosophy. It's like, we're yes people, right? We're going to make this work. We're not going to say no ever, and we're yes people, and let's just figure it out. We'll be flexible, we'll try different things, and that really to me is it. So I'm all for training and everything, but I really firmly believe that so much of it is just attitude. So
You know, we a couple years ago we surveyed over 230 people, and about half were families and half were educators, and we asked them. It was a online survey, and we asked them what were the greatest barriers to inclusion, and the number one thing that came back over and over was people's attitudes and people's low expectations, and that's what's hard. That's what requires that culture shift. Yes, people do need to feel comfortable and capable, and they need strategies to do that. But that culture shift piece, you know,
a lot of that, I think, perhaps the most effective way, I think, to imbue that in people is to have models. Like, you have to see it. Like, so many people, I couldn't imagine how my kid would be included because I had never seen it before. But you can look online, or, you know, there are schools in Arlington and in Fairfax who do this well. And so I think once you can visualize it, you're like, oh, is that it? Is that what we do? So I think that is a good first step if we can sort of do that. But yeah, excellent point.
You know, what I've learned about being a policymaker is, you know, I think that the pressure points have to come from all places. And what I believe policies are your value system. And they're your parameters for how you're going to operate. And education is a place where we have the ability to, as a community, whether it's a small community, a greater community, the community of the country, change the cultural shift. And so for me, I think that we are a great representative of a community. You know, a parent, a policymaker, a person who's working in higher education, a person who's working in a nonprofit community, working towards the same cause. And we need all of those pressure points to really affect change. We need the parent advocate who says, my child is ready. I mean, I have found parents who are fearful of having their children in an inclusive environment. And I think it's, I can't speak from personal experience, but I try to put myself in others' shoes, and I think, you know, it is the fear of, will you understand my child? Will you be able to care for my child? Are you open enough to learn to communicate with my child, whatever that communication style is? And having that trust, that is huge. But as a policymaker, I need to make sure that I'm letting everyone know in the system, this is our value system. You will be the person that parent can trust. And then we need the parents to take the chance. And we need the community to support our system and say, let's tell you how we can do. And we need the universities educating our teachers and saying, you're going to go into these classrooms and you're going to teach everybody regardless. Regardless of the long list of things that we like to list, but really it's regardless. And it's called differentiated learning. We're going to figure out what the needs are of every student, and we're going to provide those needs in the classroom. And here's a toolbox for you. Pick, because what I also find is that a lot of the tools that are used with our students with disabilities or English language learners are tools that help everybody.
That's right.
Everybody.
Yeah.
You know, and if we could just show people that you want a teacher who is trained in what we are calling specialized training, which really is not. It's just giving them a bigger toolbox. So now your child, regardless of whatever they need, will have the tool they need to be taught.
I mean, Liz can talk about the research. She's the PhD, but there are studies that show that the test scores for all students rise when there's a kid with significant support needs in the classroom. Because the teachers become better teachers.
Yeah, and it empowers the students to be better leaders.
Yes,
at a
It
young
does.
age.
That's exactly right.
And the empathy piece is
yes, that's huge. So all the
Yeah.
soft skills. You did say something that I just wanted to. You said, I don't think my kids are ready or whatever, right? So, you know, so that's also a hugely common misconception that no kids need to be ready, right? And they're never going to get ready, even if they had to be ready
get less
in a
ready.
separate
They get less ready the more they're kept.
If you're in a separate classroom, the only thing you're getting ready for is a separate adulthood, right? In an institution or something, right? That's not training you for anything. So we try to, as advocates, as parent advocates, we try to flip that over. It's like, well, are you ready? You know, you guys need to be ready, and you know, it's not the kid's fault if it's not working, right? So, especially if a kid who's never had an opportunity to be included ever, right? So,
You know, special ed is my field, but I am the first person to be very public, along with many others, to say special education has not been successful. The outcomes of separate special education have been pretty abysmal. We have kids who are leaving high school and they're unemployed and they're underemployed, and this is kids with mild disabilities, not just kids with significant disabilities. And they are not prepared for an independent life. And so special education, the way we've envisioned it since 1976 when the law passed, has not really worked. And so I think one of the pieces that does make me optimistic is that schools are changing. Schools are having to change to be responsive to the very varied needs of kids that are coming. You've heard a lot about trauma-informed care. We have a lot of children who lead very difficult lives. And schools, our schools here in America, we take all children, we educate all children. And so we're transforming education. So I'm hopeful in that way.
one of the things I've noticed is, you know, Arlington is very, very diverse in many ways, not just with students with disabilities, and geographically the county, the southern part of the county tends to have more ethnic diversity than the northern part, and we've noticed that the schools in the southern part of the county actually seem to do a slightly better job often with students with disabilities, because maybe just culturally they're used to welcoming students who don't speak English, who are undocumented, who have trauma histories or whatever, and they're like, all right, yeah, we welcome everyone, we'll make it work for everyone. So so just an anecdote there.
We're very lucky because the Virginia Board of People with Disabilities has developed some very significant policy around inclusive education and made the decision last year to give a portion of money to that cause. And so we received a grant, the Center for Inclusive Practices at Radford, and we're working with 2 school divisions, Waynesboro City Schools and Pulaski County Schools, both school divisions that have really had their challenges. They have high poverty. They have not had success with students with disabilities academically. They have had pretty low levels of inclusion, and it's really exciting work because they are wanting to write policy. They are wanting to, at individual school levels, sort of figure it out. And we feel very lucky to be sort of helping guide that process, not dictating it, but guiding it. And so a really interesting thing, we're helping them use something called the Inclusive Practices Checklist that has a number of best practices, and schools can do some pre-assessment and then some post-assessment. And the schools we're working with have significant Spanish-speaking population. And so we've had to work to translate the surveys. But just this past week, I've been looking for Spanish materials on inclusion, and there are some websites that have it, but those major texts that we all rely on, they're only in English.
Shocking. Wow.
So it was a kind of quite the, wow, interesting.
That is interesting.
There's something that you mentioned, and as I was thinking about it, it reminded me that, one of the things that we also need to address when we're having this conversation is that the fear of parents who don't have a student with disability. And as a board member, we get parents coming to us with all different perspectives and different concerns. We have had parents come and say, my child is in a classroom with a student with a disability, and it's not going well, and what are you going to do about it? And I think that's something that we have to do for our community, is have that education as well. How is that different than any other experience that your child may be having with someone, another student in the classroom. Is it really the disability piece, or is, but those are challenging conversations. I relate them to like having challenging conversations about race, having challenging conversations about equity, and I just wanted to make sure we mention that in our conversation because it is important to acknowledge that there's still that fear from community members who maybe haven't had the exposure like you discussed.
Right, the parents especially.
The parent,
I mean, the one easy response to that is, well, why is that child more entitled to be in that classroom than the other child, right? So that's the sort of civil rights response to that. It was not right that we had segregation, right, to begin with.
Of course.
So, are you basically saying you want to perpetuate segregation for your child? Like, is that, so I don't know, that's like one, obviously not very satisfying response, but, I mean, if you think about it holistically, that really is what, know.
But I think like in any situation you're managing, you have two people, whatever the issue is that's having, there's a mediator that has to come in. There is a process that comes in. We have students that get bullied. We have students that are bullies. What mechanisms do we use to help both children? These mechanisms should be put in place, but it's being able to express that to our community members that have those fears, that while we're looking at a truly inclusive school system, we are looking at all aspects of that, and that those mechanisms in place will help everyone. And I think it's very important that we don't shy away from that part of the discussion, because we need to teach the community, I think, or the community that is not educated in this regard or doesn't understand what inclusion means, that it's not just a matter of being inclusive, but it's a civil rights issue, and that we have processes in place that support all of our children. And when a school system isn't doing that correctly, you have to correct it regardless of who the student is.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, is that when you build a culture that is inclusive, bullying rates go down, and the reason why most people are bullying others is because they don't understand that person. So they, so like if they're learning about their peer that has intellectual disability or disability, period, they're getting to know that person as a person first, and then they see that it's nothing that they're more similar than not the same. So if you know somebody, you're less likely to bully them because you develop a relationship with them. So I think that's very important in education, especially the times that we live in now, is that we open up the opportunity to get to learn and know each other, which is a part of your education and experience as a person growing up, so that you can be an adult and be more open and have opportunities to employ people with special need or disability. So the more that we know about each other, we give each other more opportunities to be included.
I think that one of the things that's nice about the unified sports concept is it takes some of the intense competition away. And that's one of the issues with schools, that parents feel the stakes are so high. Well, maybe my child isn't going to achieve if there are these other children in the classroom that are holding the class down. So it's nice to have this blend of sort of sports and recreation in which people can build relationships that are not quite so fierce. And schools need to be not so competitive, maybe.
So, because through sports, it adds that other piece of social inclusion. So, realistically, our Special Olympics families, when their children are in school, up until elementary, middle school, elementary, they might be a little bit more inclusive, as like socially aware and being included. But when you get to middle school, it's a little bit different, because we're all mean in middle school to a certain degree, and people don't get invited to birthday parties because they're in cliques, and this person is not too cool, or this person doesn't like the same fashion as I do. But in unified sports, that all goes away, because everybody is perpetually the same on the team, because they're based on their ability level of that sport. So it's an opportunity for them to be the same, levels the playing field, and promotes inclusion through the sports for a vehicle for change to to be able to be a better community as one. So I've really loved seeing that in our schools and the communities across Virginia, to have that opportunity to use sports in that way and build youth leadership and build those friendships where people are saying hi to each other in the classrooms. They know their friends because they're on the same team, and then they're in best buddies or a unified club. They're calling each other to do things outside of school, which leads some of our students to be able to want to know that they already want to be in the special education field when they grow up, or be a job coach. And they're making these decisions at an early age because they're getting to know their peers.
Well, I would just say, as a parent, I am so grateful for the three of you and for all of your colleagues who are working on this issue, and just so pleased that you all have such wonderful attitudes about welcoming and including students with significant disabilities like my child.
Yes, it's very exciting. I'm very proud to be a part of it. I want my children to have the opportunity to look at everybody as the same, and value them as the way they'll be able to contribute to the community. And all of this is done through working with schools and awesome people in the community. So it's very exciting, I think.